Abby, thanks so much, and welcome everyone to our Teaming Up Against Hate panel. We have three very distinguished panelists. We're eager to discuss the subject with them. First, just a few thoughts to kind of tee up our discussion. I was thinking about this, but we're going to be talking about the ways in which people in the world of sports um, can combat bias and discrimination and the role they can play in that discussion, including, of course, combating anti-Semitism. And I'm 51. I was born in 1969. It's kind of the peak of the activist era in sports, which then kind of started waning away. What we've seen in the last several years, though, and in particular in the last year, I would say, is that athletes and the world of sports are engaging in these broader discussions now in a way that they haven't in a long time. And this year, after Breonna Taylor was shot to death in her home, after the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis by a police officer, after Jacob Blake was shot and paralyzed in Kenosha, Wisconsin, we've seen this level of engagement from the sports community on an unprecedented scale. I think it's fair to argue. We've seen athletes and figures in sports speak out on racial and social justice issues, on police brutality, on criminal justice reform. We've seen them getting involved in electoral politics in a way that we haven't in a long time, or maybe again in an unprecedented way, a way we've never seen before. Now, when we talk about anti-Semitism in sports in America, historically, it's been, I think it's fair to say, different conversation than the conversation about what happens in that regard in other parts of the world, whether it's Europe or the Middle East. We don't see, fortunately, the chants and the hate we're accustomed to seeing at soccer venues, for instance, directed at teams with Jewish supporters or teams with some kind of historical Jewish connection. But this year here in the U.S., there have been disturbing instances of anti-Semitism in sports, and we'll be speaking about that as well. First of all, Zach, Gabe, Phaedra, and I think the goal here is really for us to have an edifying and free and open discussion about what's going on at this unique time in sports. Phaedra, let's start with you. As the incoming president of Women's Sports Foundation, as a legend in your sport, to see athletes, so many athletes, kind of speak up and take leadership positions in the national discussions we've been having. What's that been like for you?
Jeremy, it's been incredibly empowering. It's something that I feel like Colin Kaepernick deserves credit for because he really started something real, and it literally cost him his career. But it's so empowering to see so many athletes stepping up, in light of, the haters, in light of all of the pushback, and use their powerful platform. It's something that has created, I think, a tidal wave and sort of a new culture. And it's something that we should certainly thrive in and continue the momentum build as we push forward.
Gabe?
Yeah, no, I think Phaedra hit the nail on the head. It has been empowering. It's been inspiring. And I think one thing that stands out for me is it's changed the way I've thought about coming to the clubhouse every day. It's changed the way I've had conversations with players and with other staff members. I historically feel like we've spent 99% of our time discussing mechanical changes or how players could get better through training off the field, and very, very little time talking about social justice issues. I think the most striking change has been those conversations have been as present in the clubhouse, conversations specifically around social justice, as they ever have been before, and I think that's necessary. We've had people of color, we've had women, we've had homosexuals ask for us to be allies. Marginalized communities ask for us to be allies, and we have a long way to go. But I think this particular baseball season was a step in the right direction in using our voices to create change.
Zach?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that we're able to use our voices as athletes, especially. You can say it's because of 2020 and the world that we live in. You can say it's based off of the availability of social media and to have large audiences. But we are known from college to the pros as athletes. We're never known for our scholars and community work and things like that. And all of us come from so many diverse backgrounds, coaching staff, and the people in the upper offices as well. So when we're able to come together and use sports, use the spotlight that's on us, I think the biggest thing and the biggest change is the voice of the athletes. And that's the most powerful, because every kid grows up and decides that they want to be a professional athlete. And then they go on to coach, and then they go on to work in the offices. And we need to make sure that those kids have the right mindset.
I guess the question, in some respects then, is why are athletes feeling empowered now in a way that for so long, the default position seemed to be, and this wasn't true of everyone, don't get me wrong, but the default position for some of the biggest stars, embodied by whether it was not an apocryphal comment, Michael Jordan's comments about who buys sneakers, but Phaedra, where is the sense of empowerment coming from now? How are athletes, and why do they feel comfortable doing so now when they didn't for so long?
I think it's a multitude of things. For me personally, seeing this stuff in the media, people being able to whip out their iPhones and their Androids and capture some of these crazy, hate-filled moments, some of these killings, right? Some of the brutality that we've seen transpire over. I mean, really, it's been happening forever, right? But what we've seen in the most recent years has brought this into our living rooms. It's brought it into our homes, and it's a bit too close for comfort. And so for me, it's seeing all of that, but also for me, it's growing up. I grew up in rural Georgia, where this stuff happened. Right? I was called the N word many times. And as a kid, for absolutely no reason, because I don't think there's any reason to do that. And so it's kind of at the I think many athletes are reaching or have reached a point of intolerance, right? Enough is enough. I know what my power is, and I think it's also it's integrity. I know that Michael, like you mentioned, Michael Jordan, he chose not to voice a lot during his playing career for political reasons, for reasons of not wanting to upset his base or some folks in his base. And I don't necessarily blame him for that. But you have a rise now in this tide, and these athletes are raising their voices. The WNBA has really been and done an exceptional job of consistently bringing social justice issues to the forefront. Enough's enough. I feel like as a woman, as a Black woman, as a Black gay woman, what do I have to lose, right? I need to be able to go to sleep and rest peacefully at night. And so when I voice my, when I've advocated, when I've done the work in the front lines, I can do that, right? When I know that I've fought for the next generation to have less of the stuff that we are going through, and obviously we're going through a lot less than what our parents went through, I can rest a little bit better, knowing that maybe tomorrow the world will be an even better place.
I'm wondering, Gabe, in the world of baseball, baseball celebrates, as well it should, of course, the legacy of Jackie Robinson and Jackie Robinson's importance not only in integrating sports, starting with baseball, but in changing our society. I don't think can be overstated. But baseball is at a point now, and it's been heading in this direction for 40 years, where African American participation, African American numbers in the major leagues are at the lowest point they've been in I think it's something like 60 years. So these conversations that have been taking place over the course of the last year, what has this moment been like for baseball?
Yeah, so in baseball, I wanted to kind of rewind back to the question about why athletes are comfortable speaking out now. And I mean, I think it's directly related to your question in baseball specifically. I actually don't think that that players are especially comfortable speaking out in baseball. And I don't think like now is the moment that they feel more comfortable than they ever have before. I think that some of the topics that we're discussing, discrimination, systemic racism, these are topics that players actually feel very uncomfortable discussing publicly. And in fact, I think they have a very hard time taking a stance on either side of these issues. They're worried that they're going to be judged and condemned for saying anything. So it almost feels more comfortable for them to stay silent. So just addressing that briefly, I think there's still a tremendous amount of discomfort, but I think what's most encouraging about the moment is that despite that discomfort and despite the fear of what might happen on social media if players take a specific stance in baseball right now, they're still doing it. And I think that's the biggest change, is they're finding the courage within them to take a stance on the field, to take a stance between the lines, to protest a game if necessary, to go on social media and post their beliefs wherever they stand on a topic, even with feeling like they might be losing some friends, or even to take a step further, losing some followers, which for a young baseball player, a 22, 23-year-old, seems really important. So I think that's the part that has really changed, is the discomfort has always been there. Sometimes the discomfort's even higher now than it ever has been because of the amount of eyeballs. But players are now finding the courage to say something.
And the polarization in some ways in our country right now, which is at a peak. Zach, what about football? Where, as Phaedra mentioned, so much of this discussion has been centered since the stance Colin Kaepernick took more than 4 years ago now.
Yeah, I think him going through those struggles, like she mentioned, of being brave, but also in result losing his job. But it was also a revolution, and he opened the eyes of the most powerful people in our sport and in most sports, and that's the owners. I think the biggest thing for athletes, especially in the NFL, the biggest reason why, which is like 80+% black and brown, I think the biggest thing is the backing of the ownership and the support of the coaches. I have one of 3 or 4 black coaches in the NFL, Coach Tomlin, but for him to be supported by Mr. Rooney and Mr. Colbert, Kevin Colbert, our GM, during a team meeting this offseason, we were able to share stories, teammates, about, how things like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all those things affected us, and how it opened our eyes, and our voice, and we begging to use our power. It's not normal. Let's not talk about kneeling. Let's actually make a change. But that original kneel by Colin Kaepernick, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm attacking Michael Jordan, but sometimes guys like him who decided to do that with that kind of magnitude of following, sometimes it's disappointing, because there's other men who have a similar following, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, that have not only defended blacks but also defended Jews as well. I think it's one of those type of things where you have to be able to make a difference. And we give back so much during charity and philanthropy and everything like that with our own foundations, but our voice, that's what's going to inspire a kid to be able to carry it on and make change.
And I think, Zach, it's important to mention here at this point why it's so special to have you here with us talking about these issues, because in July, after Deshaun Jackson, prominent pro football player who happens to be with the Eagles, posted anti-Semitic comments on Instagram, posted anti-Semitic tropes, and all kinds of terrible stuff. You spoke out very forcefully afterwards, condemning those comments. And we should mention Deshaun Jackson has subsequently apologized. But you spoke out very forcefully. And you're not Jewish, although you were a member of a Jewish fraternity at USC. Why did you speak out?
It was just one of those things where we have to be able to hold each other accountable. Accountability amongst players in the NFLPA and players amongst all the leagues. When one of us says something stupid, we just got to step up and say, that wasn't right. We have such a huge following, especially in the National Football League. It's the biggest and most powerful brand in American sports. And for us to say things like that when we're already in such a powerful movement and change, and we have those voices, when we're given that privilege, we need to understand that our fans are just as diverse as everyone else in America, and there's so many cultures and so many groups. So when we're trying to uplift ourselves, we need to make sure that, like I said before, we're not stepping on others' backs to get there. And bringing the Jewish community into it was just unfair, and it was just natural for me to say something. I tweeted one thing, and it affected a lot of people, and that's easy for me.
As a Jewish athlete yourself, Gabe, spent a dozen years playing professionally in the major leagues and overseas in Japan. How did it hit you when you saw what Deshaun Jackson said?
Yeah, so before I get to what Deshaun Jackson said, I just wanted to pause for a second and just mention how supported I feel as a Jew by Zach, right? And obviously that encourages me to speak up for marginalized groups when the time calls for it. So Zach, I just want to let you know I appreciate it, and it means a lot to hear you talk through it, and really to talk through it. Yeah, appreciate that. When I read Deshaun's quotes, I just thought about him as somebody who was really uneducated about the history of the Jewish people, the ways that we've been discriminated against, the amount of people who have died because of a bloodline and or the desire to practice a religion. So I think the way we combat comments like the one Deshaun made is to lead with as much empathy as possible. Understand that that comes from a place of conditioning that I don't have exposure to, but clearly Deshaun, was told things along the way that just clearly were not true. But then, like Zach said, those are the moments when we come strong as well and say that ignorance is not an excuse for making comments like that. And one of the ways that we can just get better is becoming more educated about the history of the people that we come to work with every day and the people that come watch us play and perform. And that's all of our responsibility on a regular basis.
I want to say, I think that I agree with you 100%, but I think it's even simpler than that. Like, we're all human beings at the end of the day. We all get up in the morning. We all have a purpose in life. That common denominator is oxygen that runs through our body and the blood that runs through our veins, right? And so even without understanding of one's history, just giving each other the benefit of the doubt as being human beings, I think is just very marginal. Is all we need to do. 100% agree with you, but I don't think I think putting another hurdle there for folks to have to get past just being human is enough, and just being able to reflect on your own life, because everyone's had some sort of adversity, even the most non-marginalized groups. So just taking a page from that chapter and applying it to someone else, I think is food for thought for, I think, everyone. So
It seems, the discussion we're having, the discussion so many people are having is, how do we address bias, and which can take many different forms, of course, racism or sexism or homophobia or anti-Semitism. When we're speaking specifically about the pernicious effects of anti-Semitism, is there some way that we have to help people who aren't Jewish better understand just how dangerous that is, Zach?
I think, especially, go back to what Gabe was saying, is the education piece. And especially in my sport, educating ourselves on Jews and the Jewish community is important. And it's not only because it's a member of our audience, but Phaedra said it right. We're human beings. And so when we represent someone, I think that being able to understand what it is that pisses them off. I remember to this day, when I heard a racial slur towards one of my Jewish friends in college during a pickup basketball game, things got heated. And racism is ugly. And in the time that we live right now, we have a voice, and those voices through social media, through platforms, and even through live games now. They mentioned earlier protesting games and being able to say, hey, we're not just going to play to entertain. We want to play to help make change as well. I think educating ourselves, especially in my sport, is the most important thing.
You all have big platforms, as an executive, as a manager, as a player in the most popular league in American sports. Let me ask each of you how you think you can use those platforms to combat hate, to continue to educate, and to, I guess it sounds corny, but in this highly polarized, divided time, bring us closer together. Phaedra?
how do we use the platform? We just continue to do what we're doing, continue to pound the table. I know particularly, obviously, with Women's Sports Foundation, as the president-elect, that's one of one of the main focus or key focus areas that I'm looking forward to, is expanding this idea of inclusivity and representation for all. But in my role, even as a board member for USA Rugby, it was and it continues to be post board, pounding the table, making sure that the DEI committee, continues to grow and thrive, and the board continues to reflect the demographic of people that play the game, and not just, it's not just full of, white men, right? It's again, speaking up in those uncomfortable moments when you're the only one at the table, to talk about marginalized groups. It's just continuing to do the things that we're doing now. Again, we have incredible leaders right here on this panel, but we also have others in the sports world, and I've mentioned many already. But we just continue to create the momentum because, as Zach said, kids out there look to athletes, right? These are the first, real role models that they see. And when they see their role model speaking out against hate, speaking out against anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism speaking out against racial injustice across the board, or and speaking out against transgender, everything, right? Um, it creates a path for them to take, and that's really what we're doing. We're setting an example.
Gabe?
Yeah, no, happy to chime in here. I think the most important way that I can use my platform is in our hiring practices. I think it's the way that we, like people in my position, can make the most immediate and powerful impact. And I think Phaedra touched on it a little bit, but I think every time we have an open position, that we see it as hiring, and this is for coaching positions as well. But any position that's under the clubhouse roof, and any position that has an opportunity to kind of steer the tide, that we consider a woman a plus, a woman of color a plus plus, a Spanish speaking woman of color plus plus plus, and we push to put those types of profiles in power. And I think that's how you make sweeping change.
Zach?
Yeah, I think Phaedra's right. Like, keep the foot on their neck as a player. What we're trying to do is make change, not within sports. Yes, within certain things like how audiences interact with players, and yes, sometimes, especially, we hear unfortunate situations of racist comments towards one of each other, and anti-Semitic comments as well. Julian Edelman, he spoke up and said that it was like 10 years ago or so, somebody called him anti-Semitic comment or name, and that's crazy. That's 10 years ago. So, like I said, what we're trying to do is not change sports. We're trying to change the world. And how do we do that? We keep showing a backing towards our audience and towards the people, and we keep it consistent. And it's not just something that's just 2020. It carries on for the rest of our careers and the rest of our lives.
As we've been talking about, this year we've seen athletes speaking out. We've seen the world of sports engaged in a way that we haven't before, certainly not recently. And I'm wondering if there's anything from your perspective, each of you, that you saw this year, a moment involving an athlete or sports, whether it's the way the NBA negotiated after Jacob Blake was shot, to have all teams work to register more people, work in the electoral process, or the WNBA taking a stand by dedicating its season to Breonna Taylor and Say Her Name, that campaign. If there was something in particular that inspired you, gave you hope for the future, that suggests to you that sports really does have the power to affect change in a larger sense. Phaedra?
Yeah, and this is probably my example of something that no one's aware of because it happened in rugby, which is not as nearly mainstream as baseball and football. But World Rugby introduced a policy, a trans ban, basically, on trans women in playing the women's game. And so what I saw was, by way of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for USA Rugby, commissioned players, right? Commissioned Alev Kelter, commissioned former player Jamie Burke, Jenny Liu. You had a number of women's national team players who just, put their foot on the gas and put together this incredible panel of scientists, doctors, and experts on this topic, on transgender athletes in the sport. And they compiled an incredible report that presented not only to World Rugby, but to other unions, to educate them. And they also, called on other athletes from around the world and presented this, and have created this incredible, like I said, this incredible resource that hopefully World Rugby will take note of and actually take seriously. But that was a fight they put forth for transgender athletes that they didn't have to do. And so the more, and actually they had a lot to lose, right? Because you're going really against the giant of rugby. And so, my hat's off to them, to those athletes that really kind of put themselves on the line, and put their bodies on the line, their minds on the line, in that fight. That was pretty awesome.
Gabe, anything inspire you in particular?
Yeah, Jeremy. I can remember a moment in the middle of the season when we were standing around the clubhouse deciding if we were gonna protest a game, and I looked around our clubhouse and I saw one of our black coaches openly express his discomfort and his dissatisfaction. We had a woman in our clubhouse who I looked over at, and I could kind of see her participating in the discussion as well. We had players from all sorts of backgrounds and ethnicities all having the discussion about what made the most sense for that night's game. That was and by the way, we all had masks on, right? So this was very foreign, something that I had never experienced before, but certainly inspiring that we have some real power to make change if we get together and work on this collectively.
Zach.
Yeah, unfortunately for me personally, it was, as a 26-year-old man, kind of get that young fire in your heart. A lot of people in sports became activists by just speaking out, but at first, like them being hurt, a lot of innocent Black and brown people are dying, and it's one of those things that you can't ignore, and you get emotional about when and it ruins your day, and sometimes unfortunately baseball and basketball were in season during a lot of it, and they had to have a lot of their gameplay hindered because of it. It hurts when there's a war outside, the stadium, and it's inspiring to see one teammate speak up, and it's just easy. It's like I said, it's easy.
Before we wrap this up, and this is something I've learned interviewing people, athletes, executives, coaches, et cetera, for 30 years, it's always a good idea before you wrap up a conversation to ask the people you're interviewing if there's anything else they wanted to say. And we've only skimmed the surface here. I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but is there anything else any of you wanted to say?
I just want to say thank you for having me. This is one of those type of things where you're surrounded by great people having great conversation. And these are things that don't happen in sports. And as a Black man, it feels good knowing that at each level, in the media, at the coaching level, and in the executive office, that there's a wave that just can't be stopped.
I got to ask you a follow-up to that one, Zach. What do you mean this doesn't happen in sports?
I mean, think about how more often you sit and talk about championships and stats and games and game-winning shots on ESPN. How many times, I mean, you know what I mean? I mean, compared to actually talking about someone being fatally shot because of the color of their skin. And these issues and millions of people protesting and walking the streets, and during a pandemic, it's a whole lot of things happening outside of sports, and sometimes we fail to stop dancing and entertaining for the audience rather than speaking up about it.
Well put.
And I agree, Zach. And I think these are conversations, as Gabe alluded to earlier, amongst baseball players. These aren't easy conversations. And just because we're having them more often now, it doesn't make them more comfortable. It just makes us more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so, I appreciate the opportunity to join, all three of you, in this dialogue. It's really important, and I think the more we can talk about these things, the more we learn. I've learned just from this panel. I learned quite a bit from Gabe and Zach, and so thank you for the opportunity.
I just want to say it's been a tremendous honor for me to just moderate our Teaming Up Against Hate panel here. I want to thank Phaedra Knight, Zach Banner, Gabe Kapler. You were tremendously generous with your time and your thoughts. Thank you, guys.